put a spell on you. And now hello, Midsummer Scream! Oh, it's Winifred! What's yours? I put a spell on you, and now you're gone. My wedding fell on you, and it was strong. Wretched little lives have all been cursed because of all the witches working. I'm the worst. I put a spell on you, and now you're mine. Watch out, watch out, watch out, watch out. She ain't lying. If you don't believe, you better get superstitious. Ask my sisters, she's vicious. I put a spell on you, a wicked spell. I put a spell on you. I say into pie, up and baby, up and die. I say into pie, up and baby, up and die. In Kamakoriyama, hey, I say bye bye.
Moderator for We Put a Spell on You, celebrating 25 years of Hocus Pocus, Jeff DePaoli.
Hello everybody, happy Halloween! We have an amazing lineup of people here today, so I'm not going to waste any time. Please welcome a man who did special makeup and cat effects for Hocus Pocus, Mr. Tony Gardner. Come on out! And production designer William Sandell. Come on out! The composer of Hocus Pocus, John Debney. Screenwriter Mick Garris. The actress who played Danny, welcome Flora Birch. And without this next man, there would be no Hocus Pocus. The creator and producer of Hocus Pocus, David Kirschner. Well, hello everybody.
Hey,
What about those performers, guys? Okay, I'm going to start this thing with a rapid fire question. We're going to start down at that end and work our way toward David. First thing that comes to mind, favorite Halloween candy, go.
not candy corn.
William, favorite Halloween candy, go.
Candy corn.
Snickers.
Nickel wafers.
Reese's pumpkins.
Candy corn because that's what sold the project.
Fair enough. Well, why don't you, since you said it, why don't you start with that story? You said candy corn sold Hocus Pocus to Disney. What do you mean by that?
Well, it was a part of the presentation. The presentation was that the executives walked into a room. I had two witches' brooms hanging on monofilament wire and a hollowed-out Electrolux vacuum cleaner. They walked in and said, why is a vacuum cleaner hanging from the ceiling? And the kids on the block, because my kids were too little at this point, took a Ralph's bag and for my wife and I drew pictures of a black cat, of ghosts, witches, and then my wife bought about 20 pounds of candy corn. I tore the bottom of the bag and I spread it out in front of them in a serpent kind of design, and when they walked in they smelled Halloween. And from there proceeded to tell the story that then Mick would, that we rehearse that.
The horror continues.
Mick took from there.
Nice. So this story began as a story, David, that you told to your daughters, and then it became a short story you wrote for Muppet Magazine.
That's right.
And then it became a screenplay. So how long from that story you told your daughters to a screenplay you were working on with Mick, and how did Mick get involved exactly?
And Mick can answer a part of that as well. But Mick and I had knew each other from Steven Spielberg had introduced us. We were both in our 20s, and Mick was story editor on Amazing Stories, which is a great show, and it just seemed like he was the right person to come and write on Hocus Pocus. I mean, we became friends at Amblin, Steven's company, and we both had lots of dreams and ideas and loved things that go bump in the night, and have been dear friends ever since.
And Mick, what year was this that the screenplay was written?
Well, this had to be 1986, 1985, 1986, yeah.
Yeah.
And it came out in 1993. That
Yeah.
is a long time since.
I remember there was 8 years from the time I wrote the script until the movie went into production. But originally, we were pitching it to Steven Spielberg with that same cornucopia of candy corn and everything. And Steven loved the idea until he heard that Disney was involved. And at that time, they were very competitive. Amblin and Disney were both going after the family audience. So it looked like, David is doing the pitch and I'm there to contribute whatever I can. And Spielberg is just grinning with the two of us in his conference room, and Steven, and that was it. And all of these candies and everything, and it's so great. And then David mentioned Disney, and Steven went, wait, what? And David can take it from there.
Well, maybe Steven Spielberg should direct a sequel. Anyway, so I've heard time and time again that the original story that David and Mick created was a lot darker, but I've never really heard it explained exactly what you meant by that. Now I'm going to assume no musical number, but what was so much darker about it that I guess made it kind of non-Disney?
Well, it wasn't quite as slapstick. There was humor in it. It was a darker humor, but originally it was also about 12-year-olds rather than 16-year-olds, because I think Halloween is much more potent to your maturation at 12 than it is at 16 when you're just stealing the candy from your sister. But, and it had a lot more to do with what children are afraid of and the fears confronting death, being underground, under a graveyard and all of those things. There was humor in it, but it wasn't as slapsticky and as Disney-esque. But the people at Disney felt, well, 16-year-olds aren't going to buy tickets to see a movie about 12-year-olds. So they made a decision after I had left the project. There were 11 other writers on after I had written the first couple of drafts.
And how much of that final script is yours? Like, do you see a lot of what you put in there?
Enough to give me 3 credits in the opening.
Mick, of the stuff you didn't write, Mick, what's your favorite change that came that another writer brought to it?
Well, I Put a Spell on You. That wasn't in the script, and it was really freaking great.
Now, David, you were. You were
to say this.
We've had this conversation many times. You were.
The way it came out, yes.
Yeah, he loves it now. But you were not sold on I Put a Spell on You.
No, I mean, there was nothing to see. It's just that we're going to stop the story about witches that have been released, like the genie out of a bottle. These 3 witches are released on Halloween. They've got to be put back in the bottle. And in the middle of this, there's going to be a dance number? They're going to sing? That sounds terrible. It's an awful idea. And Kenny Ortega, in his brilliance, took something and made it truly the moment of the film. And he deserves the credit for that, because it is a spectacular moment, and it's something that just brought me to just joy. I mean, there's that moment of joy with that, and then there's the end, which we'll get to later, which is where I fall apart. John Gebney and I fall apart. So yeah, that's I was completely wrong on that. I did not understand how you could put a musical number in the middle of this story, and you're going to destroy the element of fear, and yet it just added to the feeling that all of you are here for today, and that's Kenny Ortega.
For the future, David, if there's Bette Midler and somebody wants to put a musical number, you say yes.
I blew my
was an instance where you were dead right,
But
David.
there was no Bette Midler at that moment.
Okay, fair enough. Now, Thor, I'm curious, do you remember the audition process at all, and/or how many times you actually auditioned?
Well, I had a Disney contract.
Nailed
So
it.
I didn't have to audition, but there were some screen tests. Finding Max it took some extra effort, I think, and it was a bit of a process. But Vinny and Omri and I, we bonded pretty quickly, and I think that chemistry transcended and even to this day, like I have great memories of hanging out with them on the set. So it was just wound up being pretty fortuitous, I guess.
That's awesome. This is a question for any of you. I'm just curious, so 1993 was not exactly a year or even a decade so much known for female-led comedies or even feminist movies. So I'm curious, I guess, was that partially done intentionally, or how did that come about, and do you remember any comments about that when the film came out?
I actually don't. I mean, it was the idea of three witches. I think I was so young that I just thought the idea of three witches was a cool idea, and I didn't give it any thought beyond that, or was not even aware that that was something that was not particularly popular at the moment.
And
Yeah,
that's
and
the
I
idea of
remember
women.
you would think that like if this type of instance were occurring now in today's world, everyone would be hearing about it because everyone would be self-congratulating themselves through the yazoo about how we've brought you female characters. And but at the time, it wasn't even a thought. It was a good story, and we just did it, and that was it. And there wasn't any like, movement to support empowerment or anything like that. It was just seemed like a sound business plan, David.
And how much better to live in a world where you don't have to think about that stuff.
Yeah, that's the.
Now, Tony and William, we all know that the true stories come out backstage between the crew members. So, do you remember any comments about anything like that at the time?
I don't. I mean, I'd already worked with Dad on Big Business once at All Girl Productions, and I know her and Bonnie Bruckheimer were, interested in, keeping that kind of feel in their films. But no, I have my hands full building the witch house.
I think most people were just jealous that they didn't get to go on the flying rig like the witches did. And I think most people backstage wanted to help Terry Frazee and all those guys with any rigging so they'd get an opportunity to zoom across the stage.
It's true, there was a little bit of a competition on the set, but then, like, as I remember Vinny and Omri being a little silent on the day that I got to get on the rig. And after I was done, we were up there for like, I don't know, 6 hours or something like that. It was incredibly uncomfortable, and I remember telling them, no, you don't want any part of that, okay? You didn't miss anything. They like wouldn't hear any of that. They're like, whatever, you know, fine. The cute one gets to go up on the rig, whatever.
Now, how many of you on this panel actually grew up very close to Salem, Massachusetts? How many of you got to go to Salem at some point during
Well, I spent a lot of time scouting it, looking for locations for the film. They kept sending me back and forth, waiting for the fall leaves to start falling. So I love Salem. Fell in love with Marblehead and Salem. It's terrific. I know you spent a lot of time there.
Well, I went there to research the script in the first place, and it was during Halloween time. And in Salem, they spend 10 days straight celebrating Halloween, climaxing with a candlelight vigil where all the witches in Salem, and there are more witches in Salem than anywhere in the world, all parade up to Gallows Hill to celebrate the death of the witches in Salem. So I went back there 6 years in a row to do that celebration because it was such an amazing experience, and it's an amazing town, which is not so amazing in Salem, but the experience was fantastic.
We were filming for that week in Salem at when the memorial was being finished for the women and the one man, and it was at Halloween. So we're in Salem filming this great Halloween film on Halloween in Salem.
So, William, what was the process like? If you shot some of it in Salem, but you also shot a lot of it in Southern California and a lot on sound stages over at the Walt Disney Studios. So, what was I mean, that's kind of daunting to be shooting in the real location and say, okay, replicate it for California.
Well, we made real life look like our sets on Disney, on the Disney lot. We had the big stage and built, everything was built there. David's talked about this, but the street and the walls leading to the house and the road and the water wheel, this whole witch house was on this stage. Every day, the kids would come to work and they'd be on a witch house. I mean, it was a great set. Spent a lot of time designing that, and then we filled in little gaps around Southern California here. We were shooting in November, I think, late November, where we changed, I had to ask everybody to take down their Christmas lights so we could put up Halloween lights, which was pretty cool. So we shot in the West Adams district for a few days. We shot down in Whittier in their old historic town area, really cool.
Bill, I just want to say, Bill, there's a great scene where Vanessa gives Omri he thinks it's her phone number, but it's his phone number that she's giving back to him. And she's wearing that magnificent red coat that she puts on her hood, and that tree in the background, but most of the leaves were gone, and you had to put leaves on that tree. I mean, today we would do that digitally. But
everywhere we went, we had to make more fall. So it was pretty funny. I love that scene. That's still one of my favorite scenes in the film. It's so beautiful.
I had actually heard that you brought in, tell me if this is a lie or not, but you brought in region-specific dirt to the soundstage.
The trees were specific, and all the foliage was specific. It really was a pretty cool set. I mean, that was an A ticket in town. A lot of people were showing up to look at that set.
And before they tore it down, Disney had said, we're going to tear it down. David, would you like it? And
Yes, the answer is yes.
Just in our yard, could we put that in there? How could we make this work? Because it would be the greatest playhouse for kids in the world. But we couldn't do that.
I actually heard it was built like an actual cottage as well. It wasn't a set per se. Is that?
No, it's a full build.
That's crazy.
It was really a cool set. I've done a lot of sets.
It was the most incredible set I've ever been on.
And it was a whole stage. I mean, you literally opened the stage door and you walked into the outside at night, and the sky was lit up and colors disappeared into the distance, and there were different layers of trees coming at you. You felt like you were surrounded by this world. And then in the middle of all that was this little house with a wheel, and there was really water, and you would walk into it and you would forget where you were. It was the coolest place to get lost in.
And then we connected it to the cemetery too, in some kind of way. I remember that. That was like, here's the house and then the woods, and then you go down a certain path, and then that was some of our cemetery set. It was a feat, really. It was.
I have to say one thing. The whole cast was so cool and so great, and the kids were so great. But I just was telling Thor earlier, I have got to say this. We'd go to the dailies, and they were so beautiful and so wonderful, and she was amazing. I mean, there were audible gasps in the screening room because she was so little, and she was so precocious.
I was a happy kid on that set. Happy kid on that set.
Laura knew every person's line in the entire script. No one else could care, but Thora knew every person's line. When someone was off, it was
Yeah, Ben didn't like that too much.
Did you ever correct Bette Midler and all that?
Accidentally, I did one time, but learned my lesson on that, so,
That's awesome. I am curious, have any of you ever dressed up as a Hocus Pocus character for Halloween? John, you have. Come on.
No, I haven't, actually. I wish I had.
There's time left, man.
Well, when we maybe do the next one, then I'll dress up for it. And I'll
There you go.
I think you've given 6 people good ideas. Yeah.
Well, Bette dresses up every year for her ball back in New York.
yeah. I was thinking I would love to wear that out. I always, even then, I wanted to wear the outfit. The costumes were so incredible, the detail and the different fabrics and all the research that
Mary Voigt's costumes were on.
Head costume design did an incredible job with that.
Those costumes have really become iconic.
Yeah.
Are there any in the house today? I saw somebody show for.
There we go.
Stand up if you're dressed. There you go.
All right.
We're gonna go with Billy's. Look at them in the back there. You guys look awesome. Oh my God.
I actually...
The lights just came on and I saw how many of you there are, and it's more than I realized. Hi,
And we love you for coming
Thank
out.
you so much for coming out.
I was just going to say about those costumes, they're so iconic that I directed a couple episodes of Once Upon a Time, and there's an episode that takes place on Halloween, and I made sure to have 3 Sanderson sisters sitting at the bar.
Yeah, there you go.
Now, since we're on the topic of conversation, I'm going to go down the line again. Let's start with David. If you were to dress up as a Hocus Pocus character for Halloween, who would you dress up as?
Oh, Billy, in a second.
I think I might have to go with Sarah. Why not?
The truth would be Bad Billy Butcherson, but, Gary Marshall just for fun.
I'm with Mick, Gary Marshall, because I loved him. To me, he was one of the greatest human beings of all time. And I would do it just for Gary Marshall.
I guess I'd have to be
I'd go with something familiar. I'd do Billy Butcherson.
I think your costume would probably be best.
because you made it.
Since you created it.
Somebody's got to do Mrs. Satan, though. I think,
Actually, I'm curious.
Okay, I'll do that. Perfect.
How did the Gary Marshall, Penny Marshall thing come about? I'm really curious, because if you don't, the devil and his wife, yes, Gary Marshall, Penny Marshall.
And their brother and sister in real life, and Gary
Playing husband and wife is weird.
Totally weird.
Gary recently passed away, but clearly a very beloved figure by everybody. But it was really just asking Gary if he would do it, and then Gary said, "Why don't we have Penny be my wife?" And
it was
they
his
really
idea.
played off of each other.
Even better, don't you think?
Even better, yeah.
That makes it even weirder.
I couldn't believe it.
I just want to say this, that Tony, on Billy, maybe it was about, I don't know, a couple years after the film, 2 years or maybe less, I don't remember, Tony, but I came home one day and I wear glasses and can't see very well without them. And I came home and standing on my side yard was a giant guy staring in at me. And it terrified me. I had my glasses on and I'm screaming, "Who are you? What do you want? Who are you? What do you want?" And what Tony had done as a surprise, and he's a prankster anyway, he had made a 6-foot Billy Butcherson and put it in my yard. I'm screaming, having this argument with a static thing, until my wife said, "It's not real, it's Billy." But it was backlit and I truly was scared to death. It's in my office, and it is my crowning piece of little souvenir from any film I've ever made. And it looks like he'll just come to life any second.
I've seen it. It's incredible. It is.
It's actually,
it's gorgeous.
it's all the real pieces. It's when Billy loses his head, and his head rolls
I wrote
away.
that part.
We kept it. When we had Doug Jones's gloves, Mary Bowe had given me a costume to display. And we built this display, and one day it's like, I feel like we don't get as much mileage out of it as we should, and I think David would appreciate it more. And I went and I actually put it facing his side door first, into the window, and I rang the doorbell and I ran away. And nobody answered the door. So then I kind of moved him so he was sort of facing down the driveway, and then it took a little while. I think I was gone by the time you showed up. It was just left there, and now he lives in their office, and he's actually rotting for real. And every couple of years we try and glue him back together and keep him going, but he needs a little love usually.
Well, that's another thing that we have in common is Tony made the corpse of Mrs. Bates for Psycho 4 for me, and she's in my office. And
have a motif
they
going.
laughed and laughed.
So Tony, tell us a little bit about designing Billy, specifically designing a zombie for Disney.
Well, that was the tricky part, is they kept saying, all right, we want you to design us a zombie, but we want to chop his fingers off, we want to have his mouth stitched shut, we want to knock his head off. And remember, it's a Disney movie. So good luck, basically. So the idea was, okay, well, he's so dried out that when something gets cut off, it's just sort of like a dry stick, stump kind of thing. Obviously, there's no blood. He's been gone a long
Do
time.
it as neatly and cleanly as possible, please.
Yeah, we tried to keep everything clean and you know, straight up. And a lot of the credit, though, for making all that stuff work goes to Doug Jones. You know? When you design a character, a lot of times you need an inspiration. And I kind of knew visually what I wanted as far as the hair and the basic look, and I kept drawing him sort of like Michael Jackson-ish. And those Mac Tonight commercials were on TV with Moon Man playing the piano, and I'm like, whoever is in that is like literally a walking stick figure, and that head must weigh 35 pounds. And he's making this look fun, and he's in all these commercials, and he hasn't died yet. So I think we could do something cool on him, and given that he'd also be silent, he'd bring a lot to it. And we just sort of gambled on that and did all the designs for the character actually on a life cast of him that we borrowed from Steve Neal, the guy that made the Moon character. And then when we started presenting to the studio, we put hair and stuff on that bus, and it was always sort of Doug Jones that went to the meeting, and then they were like, well, let's meet this Doug Jones guy, and Doug nailed it, obviously, and he still does. Oh, he sent me a message. I saw him last weekend, and he was really depressed that he couldn't be here. He had a few days free, because he was, they were changing some stuff up on Star Trek, and he was able to go to Comic-Con. And he was hoping his vacation would last a little bit longer so he could come here, and it didn't happen. So I asked him this morning if there's anything he wanted me to share. And he said, yes, please say, thank you so much for sticking with us all these years and for making our movie a Halloween tradition. And as our Billy would say, But he really wanted to be here because he really genuinely loved the experience, but he really loves talking to the people that still continue to love the experience. So.
Yeah, he's a big fan too.
Yeah, well, tell me all said hi.
So I heard, and tell me if I'm wrong, the scene where he cuts his mouth open, those are real moths?
Yes, those are real moths. I mean, today that would be done digitally, but what a good sport he was. And Tony, I think you created some kind of dam in his mouth.
Yeah, Doug's favorite story about the moths. Basically, we cast his teeth and we made this little latex reservoir sort of cup that fit in his mouth. We had to put a hole in the back so he could blow dust out. We had Fuller's Earth inside this thing. And the animal control people came and they would take each moth and fold it with tweezers, and they would stack them inside this cup in his mouth on top of this pile of dust. And then he'd close his mouth, and then I would have to glue the stitches into place. And then it was time to shoot, and you know, he'd go for speed, obviously, pull the knife across, take a deep breath, and then cough air through this thing to blow the moths actually out. And I remember, and his favorite story is basically one time, it took a little too long to set the shot, and he already had the moths in and the dirt in, and he'd been standing there for a while, and they said action. And he drags the knife and he opens his mouth and he goes, and he said it's sort of this pile of sludge came out with these moths sort of sliding down the surface of it out onto the ground. So at that point everybody learned that time was a little more important and went a little faster the next time.
And with that,
They should sell that with Halloween makeup, right?
Yeah.
The Billy Butcherson moth collection. There we go. Thora, who is your favorite Sanderson sister? Just kidding. Curious, did you know, 10 years old, right? Did you know how big Bette Midler was?
yeah, it had been explained to me, and also I was a big fan of her music. Actually, I was, you know, she definitely, some of her biggest hits were always playing somewhere in the background, and so it was a huge deal, you know, to be working alongside, because she went with the Divine Miss M, you know, and that's that's how people described her, and that's what she is. And so to be working with like a Barbara Streisand or like a Beyonce or something like that of today, that was what that was then, and still is, you know. So it was an incredible honor, and a little nerve-wracking from time to time, but overall she was wonderful and one of the most dedicated actresses I had encountered in my career up until that point, apart from Lauren Bacall, of course. But yeah, he was the shizzle.
And as you mentioned, you got to fly with her.
Right,
And
yeah.
I did hear, and correct me once again if I'm wrong, did she sing Wind Beneath
She
My
did.
Wings to
She
you?
did. It was, to me and the whole crew, it was incredibly difficult. It was the harness, and it was incredibly difficult setups, and we had problems with the rig, and then we had problems with lighting, and all of that, and it just, you know, everyone was just frazzled, you know. And she just started singing. I believe it was Wind Beneath My Wings, and it stopped the whole crew, it stopped the whole stage, it stopped everything. It was beautiful.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Now, John, you came in a bit later in the process. We've got some lightning effects going on, apparently. But you came in later in the process. Actually, James Horner began scoring this film. So what's the story about that? You know, why did you leave the film, and how did you get the good fortune of continuing?
Well, I'll tell you the story as I know it, and then David will have to pick it up at some point. But there was a schedule change. James, God bless you, James. We're all huge fans of James. He had a schedule change at the very last minute, and therefore had to leave literally, I think, David, with 2 weeks before you were ready to go on the scoring stage with a 90-piece orchestra. And I took a couple of meetings, and I think the first time I met you then was in one of those first meetings, and took a meeting. There was another chap that was also meeting on it. We were, at one point Disney was going to maybe have us do it together. I had done a lot of work for Disney by then, so they sort of, they trusted me that in kind of this situation, it was sort of an emergency situation, that they needed somebody that could come in and write very quickly. And so, series of circumstances, I got the job. Thank you very much, David. And I embarked on, I don't think I slept for at least 2 weeks, and drank a lot of coffee and started to write this score about these three crazy sisters. And I remember working deep into the night all the time, and I think I played you, David, a couple of themes early on. You were so kind, and I think you liked them. And then it just sort of happened like that. It was sort of a rush to finish. And we would record at night, which is kind of rare. And after two or 3 weeks, I had the score written basically and was still writing. And so we would record at night so that I could write all day long and then go at night, and we record till midnight, I think, in many cases. So I did come, it fell in my lap, literally.
Well, and John's being humble with this. What was going on, we had worked together at Hanna-Barbera, and I love John's work. James was a dear friend. We had done a couple films at that point together, and it was going to be James, and then there was this change. He had written Come Little Children, which was a piece that obviously remained in the film and is a beautiful piece, but John had literally about 14 days to write the music that touches all of our souls and has lasted for 25 years. I mean, it's astounding. I've never known anybody to ever be able to hold it like that. Jeffrey at first was not interested in John, not that he had heard anything, but
Katzenberg?
Jeffrey Katzenberg, and he just said no. He does at this point. I think you had done the Jetsons, and you were doing stuff for us at HB, and I think Jeffrey kind of looked down his nose at at the idea of that. And
I was a kid. We were all kids, really.
And I really believed in this guy, and in a huge way. And I lost many fights with Jeffrey. I always say that I had the knife wounds in my chest, not in my back. He was very upfront with his brutalness. But this one, I was successful in pushing forward, and I was very, very proud of that. And Disney, when they heard what John had done, they not only loved it, they signed him to a 3-picture deal, and he became the ASCAP BMI New Composer of the Year because of what he did on Hocus Pocus.
And John, did you not, that whole little blue Disney castle logo at the beginning that we grew up at the beginning of Hocus Pocus and many other films, you composed that, correct?
I did. You know, it's sort of a long history.
Yeah, that deserves applause. How many Disney movies start that way?
My dad, you know, the Disney DNA in the blood runs so deep in me. My dad worked at Disney for 40 years, and he was the clapper boy on Snow White as a 16-year-old kid. So I had a history with Disney, and that certainly helped me, David, when you fought for me to get this job. So yeah, over the years I had done the castle logos and some other stuff. So I was not a complete unknown, quantity. However, I had never done a major film, and this was my first major film.
Now, as David mentioned, the song Garden of Magic, Sarah's song, was already written, and so they give that to you. Did that inspire you for the rest of the score at that point?
Absolutely. That was probably the first piece of music I heard, and it was so gorgeous what James had done. And what David and I had spoken about was that the very beginning of the movie I had to quote it a little bit. And so I hinted at that theme. And throughout the movie I hint at that theme a bit. And it's just a gorgeous theme. Come little children. I mean, it's just...
Sing along time.
Lilted.
Disney
I'm a musician, I sing stuff. Sometimes not very well. But yeah, it was a beautiful song. Beautiful song.
Nice. Now, what exactly did you know when you accepted the job? Did they just show you the unscored film, or at that point, did you just have the script? Because I mean, 2 weeks
it
is
was
nothing.
done.
What have you guys done in 2 weeks?
Yeah, the film was done. The film was done. I knew inherently that I had to come up with a couple of the main themes right away. And I remember a great head of music, Chris Montan, over at Disney at the time. Very good friend of mine. And I remember going in and doing a little demo and then playing it on the piano first. You didn't know this, David. I played it for Chris Montan. And he said, that's really good. I like it. It's very witchy. And he goes, well, what if you... And he gave me a couple suggestions that were really quite good. So I changed it a little bit, and then I think David heard the melody. That was the first thing I had to do, Jeff. I had to come up with this theme that was witchy and, you know...
Iconic at this point.
It turned into being iconic, perhaps, but I knew I had to come up with that. Ba, da, da, bum, 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 bum. And it had to be operatic, really, and I didn't know at the time, but it's rather operatic, the whole thing, because the sisters are so over the top, you know, they're operatic, and especially Bette. I used to love writing those pieces of music for Bette, because everything she did was so just, you know, and she'd give her the spell, and it was with such panache.
She's Broadway.
Yeah.
She's Broadway.
She's Broadway.
Well, yeah, and David hires a choreographer to direct, so
Exactly.
some had to be.
And that would be the last.
And he came from choreography as well, so
Yes.
a lot of musical elements to the whole film, obviously.
And I think that would be my other main thing for me, Jeff, was that Kenny is such a wonderful, brilliant man, such a lovely, wonderful spirited, you know, human being. And he sort of clued me in early. He goes, well, watch how the girls are walking. They're really dancing. And I went, oh, they're dancing. So literally when they're going down the street in tempo, and that was a little key to the door that helped me with the score immensely. It really did.
I think one of my fondest memories is watching Bette and Kathy and Sarah Jessica working out their routines on stage. Remember, and they're like, and we're doing our thing in the art department, and there are these really cool actresses dancing around.
They had their own department.
Yeah,
Like, they had their own department
they were like
on the
gang
set.
of witches. They were in the corner doing their own work.
And then they had the Bette had two of her assistants following around with the Middle English dictionary of curse words, and like she was so, no, she's a dedicated woman, you know. Yeah.
So when you saw the scoreless film, what did you think of it? Because I'm always amazed by that. Like the score of a film, at least for me, is like such a huge part. I can't imagine as a composer sitting there watching a movie with no music. It must feel so entirely different. So I'm curious, what were your first thoughts when you saw it?
Oh, I was scared to death. That was thought number one, because this was my first major film score, and I could have failed miserably, and so that's always a good motivation, right? The fears we all know. And so I fell in love with the movie right away. Halloween's my favorite holiday. I love these women, right?
Did you attempt the score? Was there a
believe
temp score?
it was tempt, but it was probably tempt with whatever was popular at that moment. Maybe Witches of Eastwick? I'm not sure of that.
It was so different than what you did.
It was different.
It was completely
It
different.
really was completely different. It's hard to answer the question, Jeff, because every film is different. This one, I knew that our three ladies were so, and including Thora, the whole cast. I really fell in love with Thora, and I knew I had to create a brother-sister theme, which I also did very quickly, you know, and I fell in love with it. I just ran. It's like getting on the bike in the scene that we love when Vanessa Shaw takes off, and it's just the leaves falling, and it's a composer's dream.
I think you said that. It's always been my favorite
It's
scene.
my favorite scene.
And you
shared
said that, yeah.
It was the first thing I ever recorded for the film, and it was one evening, and my dear friend David Kirschner was there. The Disney brass and David, everybody was in the back, and I'm on the podium conducting, and you know, it's nerve-wracking. What could have come out could have been horrible, and luckily the first thing I recorded was this scene where, you know, he takes off on the bike and the leaves are falling, and I remember turning around once we did the first take, and there was such a sigh of relief on my friend's David's face, and luckily, I'm so thankful, Disney was also there, all breathing a big sigh of relief. So that's a special scene for me.
I mean, because
it was certainly a lot of fun to put a period on. I always felt that every piece of music, even if it was, you know, scary, a little scary, it had to be scary, but it had to have that fun element. You know, one of my other favorite scenes, I'll just throw it out, when Winnie's gonna die, and she's saying,
Spoiler alert!
Take me to the window. Am I skipping ahead? Yeah, and she says, take me to the window. And to me, that was the film right there, because she's so funny. And then she gets up, and that light is shooting up, and then the music just gets crazy, and they're off, and then Kathy gets on that wonderful Uber vacuum cleaner. And so that's the film in a nutshell, and I think that's a tribute to David and what everybody did, the cast did, was it had to have the reality of this dire situation. These witches are going to suck the life out of every kid in Salem, and there's a ticking clock, and you guys created it, David conceptualized and wrote it.
Well, if it didn't have a heart, it wouldn't have worked. And the music encapsulates that heart. Everybody did their work around that emotional core. And even when it's at its scariest, or at its funniest, or at its silliest, it still felt genuine and
Well,
human.
not only that, but that black flame candle, that was no joke. That candle was the real deal. They really did a number with that, and it was pretty cool to see.
That was David's idea.
Now, a question for all of you. I'm curious, when you got the news that the film was going to be released in July, because nobody wants to celebrate Halloween in July.
I do.
Seriously though, what did you think when you heard, oh, July, against Jurassic Park? Sure! What were your thoughts?
Anybody?
Nothing good, I don't think. Nothing too positive. But we all loved working on it so much that I think there was a huge sense of anticipation of being eager to share it with our audience and to have you guys enjoy it as much as you now do. But we thought that this here would happen then, and it didn't, and it was a big letdown. But I think it did. To me, this proves even more that we were onto something, and all that love and dedication paid off in the end.
I have a slightly different perspective because I wrote it 8 years before it was shot. It's coming out in July? Freaking great!
I just knew, I mean, I'm a below-the-line guy, but I couldn't speak to other things, but I was just happy I did the world's greatest Halloween film.
Yeah.
It was done. I was so happy.
One of the coolest things on Halloween is when little girls dressed as the Sanderson sisters knock on your door.
One of my favorite things about Hocus Pocus is simply the fact, like I said, I grew up in New England, and that is like, SoCal Halloween is awesome, but like New England Halloween is the right Halloween. I will say, both Hocus Pocus and Trick or Treat are the two movies, in my opinion, that do it the absolute best. So I love that about it. But you know, as we said, once again, the movie did not get great reviews when it came out, so I would like to know what you would like to say to those people who wrote those reviews 25 years later now.
Sorry, Disney. No, I'm not.
Anybody else have any choice words?
I mean, we were devastated. I mean, the truth is, I was in tears over it. I mean, this is something that came from my soul, for my children, and I just thought that people were going to love this. And Jeffrey Katzenberg, when we tested it, it tested through the roof. And yet, we had 30% on Rotten Tomatoes. I mean, a horrible number. And yet, about 3 or 4 years later, it started being seen on the Disney Channel, and something began to happen, something wonderful. And our daughter's friends would begin to quote complete passages from the film. And I was shocked by that. And people would come up to me and say, I love that movie. And there weren't a lot of people that saw it. We kind of limped to first base. You know, we got on base, but it wasn't any kind of box office. And it was just the film, it was I think my third or fourth film, and it was the one that was just the failure and the one that hurt the most. And then something began to happen that just has grown for over those really 22 years. Has just blossomed into something all over the world. I mean, in countries all over the world. That it's still staggering and brings me to tears when I read about that or see that or receive letters from people.
I think a lot of credit has to actually go to even Disney and the Disney Channel for not letting it go, not dropping it, not trying to discard it like, an unwanted pair of pants or something. And they kept playing it and playing it and playing it, and that provided the opportunity for the audience to grow, and it did. It took off, and that's a great. It doesn't always go that way.
I mean, I think at that point there was not a lot of programming for Halloween.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean,
all this airtime, what are we gonna play?
Especially on the Disney Channel.
Yeah.
And weirdly, something just gelled as a result of that. And when they saw those numbers begin to build, because it's still the most, on the Disney Channel, it is still the most viewed of any movie, beating Harry Potter, E.T., Christmas. so big thanks to all of you.
Why this movie? And if I could just add to all that, why the, you know, I just did a movie last year called The Greatest Showman.
Jungle Book right before that, which is staggering. The Disney Jungle Book.
Thank you. But I will tell you guys, very similar, and I haven't told David this yet, very similar phenomenon. That movie came out and tanked the first couple weeks, and we were all devastated. But like Hocus Pocus, and I knew it back then, there is such heart to Hocus Pocus. There is such a yearning, and in my humble opinion, there's a yearning for all of us out there, all of us as a human community, for inclusiveness and connectedness and love. And Hocus Pocus, you know, everybody's tried to analyze why is Hocus Pocus such a phenomenon over the years. And I think it starts with a young girl and her brother has to do something heroic to save her life, and in the end, gives his own life for her. And for some reason, sometimes our Disney friends have not quite grasped what I think is the depth of the movie, and that's a huge credit to all of you, that it is about you. It's that, it's fun, it's frolicking, but there's that beautiful scene in the end of the movie when David and I were standing, this is the last piece of music I did, Jeffrey Katzenberg, God bless him, wanted to add a joke into the end of the movie, and so we had to add some time when, you know, when our two beautiful characters now are reunited and going into the gates of heaven, I guess, David, right? That was it's a very deep thing, you know. And so we had to add some time in that, and we were down to the last minute, and I'll never forget that because I looked at my timpani player, you know, the guy that does the big kettle drum, dun, dun, dun. And we had to add on the fly a bunch of 20 seconds or something to make the ending fit after that wonderful joke that's in there, which does get a laugh every year. And so I remember looking at my guy, we had 5 minutes on the clock, and you guys know this because we're always working on deadlines, whether it's a shoot and you got to get that last shot. So I looked at my timpani player and I went, let's just do this. And David's back there, and we were all like, what are we going to do? And we did the last piece of music, and it was perfect by complete accident. You know, my guy's going bum, 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 bum. And David's back there holding his breath, and it goes bam, right on the cut to those gates closing. And my point is, some films are just blessed like that. Where, thank you. You're blessed with an incredible team of artists and actors and actresses. And it was a blessing. And and so even though it failed initially, we were all sad. But then this thing started happening, and it started happening with the little girls and their moms. And I know you're the same day. I bet everybody on this stage says, how many times I've had a little girl who now is a mom telling me with tears in their eyes, you have no idea what this movie means to us and our family.
Actually, Mick Garris has a hard R version of exactly that. Do you want to say what you said backstage?
I just said that.
Oh, don't say that.
I'll tell it to you when we're signing. No, I just said that if ever I wanted to get lucky, all I'd have to do is wear a t-shirt that says, I wrote Hocus Pocus. I think that's only women shopping.
That's hilarious. So David, a while back we were talking about the whole July release, and you had mentioned and I wasn't sure of the year, this crowd will certainly know. Nightmare Before Christmas, was that October 93? Yes? Yes. So Disney didn't...
What I didn't know was that Tim was working on, I mean, I had worked with Tim on so just some little artwork for him on Nightmare Before Christmas. My wife and I had dinner with him, and it was great, but I didn't know his film was coming out at the same time. He was deep in production, and I was just concentrating on this. And I think they were saving that for their Halloween release because they thought that our film was much more of a kid's film, and they thought that film was much more, that film was much more of, that was a more frightening film in the Disney mind.
Interesting. So you mentioned Kenny Ortega, the director of the film, and he was obviously a huge influence on the film. And I am a little curious, was it tough to convince Disney to let you use Kenny? Because up to that point, he had only, for Disney, made an even bigger flop, The Brilliant Newsies.
Right. Honestly, I did not know, Disney brought Kenny to me, and I didn't know, but he's the kind of person, just one of those rare personalities that you fall in love with. I mean, he just loves life and is so full of ideas and just optimism. And that optimism is just weaved through the film. It's so, it's very beautiful. I mean, his soul is such a part of that. And yeah, I mean, it is ironic that, you know, that Newsies had not done well, that then this film had not done well. And Kenny is, I mean, there's something at Disney called Disney Legends, and most of them are not living. Kenny is living and is a relatively young man. And, you know, Newsies, Hocus Pocus, High School Musical, Descendants 1 and 2 and 3 coming.
And all the stuff he did with Michael Jackson as well.
All the stuff,
you know,
yeah. I mean, and that documentary he did with Michael, I mean, just staggering.
Kenny's voice is that last voice you hear in that famous clip of Michael Jackson rehearsing, when he says that's it. It's kind of spooky to me.
Oh, yeah.
But let me say something about Newsies. Because I worked for Kenny Ortega and did Newsies. Don't get defensive there. And that, you know, Newsies went on to win a lot of Tonys. You know, it was big on Broadway. I mean, it's just a little early for musicals, I think. You know, then Glee and everything.
You don't have to convince me, trust me.
Let me say something about Newsies.
Focus, to me, doesn't have a ton of current references in it. You don't hear them talking about things going on in the real world in '93. Was that done on purpose?
Other than Ice.
Other than
I did not write Ice.
But was that done on purpose so that it could? I mean, it's a timeless movie to me.
You know, the Disney note was for, they wanted something, I think, I'm sorry, I just forgot the wonderful writer's name, Neil Cuthbert. That was Neil Cuthbert, that's his name, Cuthbert, joke, and Disney wanted something for exactly that reason. I think that's why Jeffrey also wanted, because Virgin wasn't in our original piece, Jeffrey really wanted the whole Virgin thing, and in my opinion, I was bothered by, because I thought it got, my favorite scene in the entire film is the scene with Thora at the end, when those gates are open, as John so beautifully presented it. And I just didn't want that being ruined with the idea of a virgin with the candle. And you can hear it. I mean, it's been dropped into the film. It was a last minute thing, a last minute Jeffrey note. He was head of the studio, and we did it. But I sure fought it and didn't win. That was a knife wound in my chest as well. But you know, people seem to love it. I just felt that it got in the way of a scene that was so beautiful and was about the love of I mean, you see Thora's love for Thackeray Binks and him. He's died, and she's crying over him. And John Debney and I always cry, no matter what, over that scene and Thora's performance. And then when those gates open. And for me, the inspiration of that scene and the gates open, and they were miniatures. They sat in my office for years. But the inspiration for that scene was strongly, if you haven't ever seen it, it's a movie called The Ghost of Mrs. Muir. And it's a magnificent film. And I just always wanted to go to heaven one day with my wife. That way, come back and get her. Choke up here. And get her. And and walk out the window to the clouds just like that to heaven. And so that was my inspiration for the gates opening and those two that love each other so much to go off for eternity together.
By the way, I believe
Getting a little bit.
I believe the word virgin is mentioned at least once every 10 minutes of the film.
I didn't know that. Wow.
I think
The
so.
power of Jeffrey Katzenberg.
Now, Tony, we haven't talked too much about Binks, and at the time, quite technically advanced, yes?
We should say yes and no, because one of those greater studio powers sort of vetoed one version of him. We had the small animatronic version, and then we had the stand-in one, the floppy one, the inflatable one, the one that gets run over, the one that reflates, the one that she cries over. But there was one close-up one that we did, and it was based on the idea what Chris Wayless did in Gremlins was he had all the gremlins were like this big, and when the camera would push in for a close-up, the gremlin head was, it was like 2.5 feet across. And we're like, that's such a great idea. Let's do that for the cat. We can make the eyes dilate, and do a lot of stuff with the ears, with translucency, and do a great performance. And we actually shot some stuff in our shop that was forced perspective. Where we were making the cat look smaller than it was, like somebody's looking down at the cat and the cat's reacting to them, and then over the opposite shoulders. Sort of like Lord of the Rings kind of stuff where you just do it all in camera, old school. And we were so excited to show it to the studio. We didn't have the ears done yet. We're like, well, let's just cut out some cardboard in the shape of the ear so they know where the ears go, so they know that we know what the silhouette of a cat looks like. And
they have a lot of imagination.
Yeah, it was great because they went, are his ears going to look like that? That looks like cardboard. This is horrible. We can't use this. We're like, we are in development. This is a preview of where we're headed. And they axed it all at that point. They said, they said, can we rework your credit? And can we take Binks out of your credit? We'll give you a single card that says you designed and created Billy Butcherson if we don't have to acknowledge you built the cat. So, hey, spoiler alert. So it's like, okay, that's fine, but a lot of the stuff with the life-size one is still in there. But the animatronic one, it was really complicated, especially for the time. And there was a huge bank of servo motors connected to it that made noise, and if he was on the street, we'd put it in a manhole cover, down the manhole that Billy's in or whatever. But I think it was technically a little too problematic, and for his credit, Larry Madrid, the guy who trained the cats, and there were a lot of cats, he had a cat that sat in the street and a bus pulled up to it and stopped right in front of it, and the cat didn't move. And we're like, we don't need to be here. This guy's got it. This is everything. So we became more about like over the shoulder, and they'd use our cat and they would digitally put a face on it. We were always kind of bummed that it was simplistic and the eyes didn't dilate. We were trying to, it's like, E.T.'s eyes dilate, it's so cool, we could do it with a cat. And we were all like so into it, and then that whole thing sort of, the door got shut on the oversized head. And the life-size one is what it is. We were able to use it quite a bit.